Once again, I'm Sydney. I am a servant of the Almighty God. I'm also the author of Humanity's Inflection Point and From Whence Cometh Intelligence. Today in this episode, continuing the Recognizing God's Omnipotence, this will be entitled God, Nature, and Us. I think this is important because everyone who has some sort of education is now being taught that there is no God. Everything around us is a product of nature, right? Now it used to be, after Sir Charles Darwin discovered evolution, that the naturalists at that point came about and they said, well, everything is just, the product of this random, we had the Big Bang, and just out of random stuff, we had biology, chemistry created biology, and all of this stuff just out of randomness, everything that we see around us just kind of coalesced and started forming itself. And so, but now, if you notice, they've kind of gone away from that. They've gone to, because we can't find, relics of that randomness around us. There's nothing random anywhere in nature, within our bodies, in any system. We don't see anything random. So now they've gone to, well, nature did all of this. And nature apparently knows our DNA, must have created DNA, and so it can manipulate everybody's DNA so that we have evolution and all of that stuff. However, we've gotten to a point now where we are building intelligence, and what we are seeing is that intelligent systems like us, organisms with intelligence, we see there is a merging of the physical with something intangible that controls the physical stuff. It's kind of like when we look at a drone or a car that's autonomous, fully autonomous, and it's driving. There's a physical car. Then there is the intelligence inside the car, inside the drone. We don't see the intelligence, we see the behavior, and that behavior is dictated by that intangible intelligence. So this is what we can observe in every plant and animal around us. We see the physical. We don't see the intelligence that's driving the behaviors. So let me go back to this part about nature. One of the really interesting things, and you really have to, it doesn't take a whole lot, but think about this. When we are born, unlike a spider, a snake, a snail, an ant, we don't have a whole lot of information. We don't know what to eat. We don't know how to build our house. We don't know anything. So we can be considered, when we are born, we can be considered like blank slates, right? We just have blank canvas. What we know, the knowledge we accumulate, which goes into our behaviors and dictate, how we go on through this world, is the stuff that we are told by our parents, our peers, our educational system. And so if even things like culture, all of that is based on acquired knowledge. So if we are born and we never went, we did not go to school, all the customs, all our behaviors are dictated by what we observe around us and what we are told. And this is why, it's important, because now we've gotten to a stage where most educational systems tell us, and I'll go into that a little bit as to why. They tell us that, no, this stuff get away from this thing about God. It's nature. Now they can define nature, and now that we're getting into intelligence, like when I talked about, the Ham dilemma, this whole concept that everything started and slowly developed over millions and billions of years, but when I challenge that with the Ham dilemma, which says hibernation could not be learned over time. You either had it or you didn't. Same thing with estivation. A frog, after in a drought, burying itself in the mud, you bury a frog, it does not survive. It had to be programmed so that the physical and that intangible intelligence that keeps the system running and also keeps the sensory, some parts of the sensory, so it knows when to wake up again. Same with hibernation, estivation, and then there is metamorphosis. That could not, if frogs laid eggs on land, you would not have tadpoles surviving. If you have butterflies and moths who were laying their eggs someplace where they did not know, so they weren't programmed properly to lay the eggs in the right spot, you wouldn't have the caterpillar. So that hibernation, estivation, metamorphosis, those things have to be perfectly programmed. Okay, so all of this leads us now, this intelligence that we are doing now is showing us that intelligence could not just slowly evolve. When you look at this specialization in a bird building a nest, now we have so many different birds, so many different nests, and this specific bird obviously has this embedded intelligence to build its nest like this. The behavior of each animal, what we call the instincts, I say the intrinsic intelligence, that had to be programmed perfectly. We don't see, of course you can learn things, but I'm talking about that instinctive things, like when you see in a colony of ants, each one has a certain role, and at a certain times different things happen. That had to be, and so now that we're building intelligence, we can recognize the amount of effort that goes into that. However, because we are born as blank slates, and we go to school where we learn a lot of fantastic things. I mean, now I've been doing IT for 30-something years. I do all kinds of stuff, different platforms, all kinds of things. I understand building intelligence. Apparently, the naturalists don't. They just say, no, intelligence is, and that special intelligence that you see embedded somehow came from something outside of it. There is also anthropomorphism, right? Anthropomorphism is where if you talk with some educated person and you start telling them about, your dog or a spider, and they will tell you, no, that's anthropomorphic, because what you're doing, they say you are taking the attributes and projecting that onto a bat or a bird or a butterfly or your cat or your dog. When in reality, this is exactly what naturalists and scientists do today, because they take that same, our attributes, and they project it onto this thing called nature. This is why nature is benevolent. Nature decides that this plant needed this, or sometimes now it's the plant itself. And coincidentally, the inspiration that, I talk about the Aestivation, that life's logic module, check it out, right? That actually lines up very nicely with that, where we have a creator who created a sensory system, created DNA, and created this Aestivation, what some things call the soul. It's the same. And so that anthropomorphism really would apply, because it's the same life logic module that exists in a bat, in the cat, in the dog, in all things, even the trees. What I talk about, life's logic module and the rules of life, like procreation, continuation of life, so all of these attributes would then be common, because that module is the same. And so what the naturalists and scientists do now is that they actually are basically saying that the Isis, that same logic module, exists outside of all things, and it's able to actually then influence the behavior and the evolutionary paths of all of these things. But they do not want to associate it with a creator. Partly, and this is, it's more than likely because when that split happened in the 19th century about creation and evolution, that split was because, unfortunately, religion can be very, with its dogma and its rules and its control, and so they're like, that's why we had the Inquisition, right? And the burning at the stake if you did not agree, rather than recognizing free will and knowledge. And we who seek truth, the inspiration that comes to us, like Dmitri Mendeleev, right? 10 years after Sir Charles Darwin recognized evolution, Dmitri Mendeleev got the periodic table in a dream. And that has changed the world. Everything around us, almost everything, right, that we make is based on that. The food we eat, our trains, planes, automobiles, phones, everything is based on the revelation of the periodic table to Dmitri Mendeleev, which happened 10 years after Sir Charles Darwin did his thing and recognized evolution. So, but those of us who seek truth, it comes to us. And so this is dovetailing very nicely, because we see the naturalists looking at nature very much like us, as if the nature itself is the Isis, except it does not make sense that you have something outside of all of us that is somehow coming and changing spiders and ants and butterflies, and it's changing from the outside. So it has to go wake up the bear. And animals hibernate, it has to go wake them up and tell them to go. See, it makes more sense. And when we, just as we do, and we're building intelligence up and embedding it, we see the intelligence is embedded in animals that hibernate. We see the intelligence embedded in the behavior of spiders, and we see that intelligence embedded. So nature in itself is a product. Like I say, it's the manifestation of God's omnipotence. It's all the things that he's designed with his Isis and the DNA and the century, all of these things. There is that external knowledge also of celestial bodies, because the Isis was designed by the same creator. So when we hear nature, that is basically getting us away and trying to move us into a godless world where we do not recognize a creator. Now, I don't know if it's evident, but I'm not a fan of religions because of the dogma and the control and all of that stuff, right? Plus, religions are just looking backwards. The scriptures are stories of men who believed in God. These men did not have the knowledge that we have today, but they were very pious men. We could admire that. But the concept of I have to follow, or whatever that guy said, in his, I'll say it, in his ignorance, he did not know about the periodic table and all the wonderful advances of science. Science, except for the part about nature, we try to prove things. And so actually this whole thing about the Isis and all of this stuff, it's an avenue for us to research, just as we research all these things about these different elements and the different properties and how we can use that. Similarly, we have to look at memory, right? Because everything we recognize, plants and all animals have memory. And we know the mechanism of intelligence is that there are things that have to reside in memory. Like when I talk about, like the corolla spider, being able to recognize quartz. You have to know that it does not go to school to learn about this stuff. That is embedded somewhere in memory. So the Isis has that intelligence has to reside somewhere. And we may be getting towards the stuff when we start looking at brain waves and all these things, because this is where we that intelligence, this knowledge, but since we can decode that stuff, in the 21st century, maybe in centuries to come, or millennium to come, we may get closer to that. But just as our drones have that intangible control system intelligently designed and implemented by us, when we look around us, we see the work of the Creator. We see that discrete, sophisticated intelligence embedded in flies, butterflies, spiders, worms, our immune system, our digestive system, things that we don't control, our autonomic systems. We see that intelligent design, where everything is so well designed. Again, nothing random here, nothing random anywhere in nature. But we need to get away from this concept of nature being this. It seems like they give it everything that you would give to a creator. But the thing, the ungodly thing really is that they don't like the rules. Now, when you go to religion, the rules are, it's terrible. You have to go back and look at what some guys. No, we got the commandments. That's it. That's it. We get the commandments, and we can build personal relationships with our Creator. This is what we are taught. We can get rid of all the other stuff. It has its purpose, its service purposes down through time, and it will continue for the future. But rather than getting away from our Creator and going into this godless nature, and now our behaviors are just a product of, so we have no self-determination, we don't have self-control. As you see now, it's about drugs, right? Take this drug because you don't need to even try to develop self-control. Which coincidentally, one of the first things many years ago I got was the key to meeting God's expectation of us is self-control. So we are moving away from that. This whole concept of nature, right, where you don't have any self-control now, it's just, But when we go back to a creator and recognize instead of this amorphous nature that we can't really describe, was it a place, is it a thing, we go back to we recognize with the Creator, the Almighty God, we have the commandments. Do as you'd be done by, the golden rule. And we start pushing away the hate, the divisiveness, and we can come together all over the world. There is no, under God, we are all one. So everywhere in the world we can get together. We can build this new community of people. Just like the animals, they are, we know there are political boundaries, but every living thing in nature has a connection. We all have the Isis. This is why we are the stewards. We have this heightened, elevated intelligence. We can be the stewards. But we can do this with people all over the world. We are all brothers and sisters. And so, again, tie up this God, nature, and us. Nature it's a farce. Because you ask anyone to describe it, where do we find it? It really is the manifestation of God's omnipotence. It's not a thing, it's the result. And so we have to recognize the Creator, and all of us, under God, start building this new community. As I will be putting it up on the website soon, it's we start building this bridge to a better world, where it does not matter what we look like, because what we see is one of God's creations. out in nature, and we may not agree with all the things we see in nature, but in order to build a system that can be maintaining an ecosystem that maintains itself, and the balance shifts and it comes back, in order to design that, we see what the Creator has done. Some things like, having all the energy from the sun basically feed all of us, from the smallest animals, and you have the food chain and all of this stuff, so that things get recycled. We don't do that. We just build stuff and then we dump it. We don't have that true recycling. We see in nature, something dies, immediately flies, and they all get together and they make sure that we have the vultures and all. We see a beautiful system. We may not agree with all of it, but you take a big picture and you're like, wow, this is an excellent, beautifully designed system. This is what God gave us. This is why I admire, now that we are recognizing the energy from the sun, which feeds us through the plants and the animals and everything that ultimately gets that energy from the sun. And now we can also start doing that. See, we start learning that, oh yeah, we can take that same energy to create the electricity or whatever we need. We are starting to get in sync, but we're missing one piece. Our educational system has taken out the Creator, and so by taking out the Creator, they've taken out the commandments. They've taken out, and even unfortunately in religions, they love to create gods that look like them. So they create a god that looks like a man, and so they can draw a picture of the god and put him up there. Do you really think that man knew about not just DNA and stem cells and all the things that we're discovering, but what about the universe, the sun, the moon, the galaxies, all of these things? The Creator knows all of this. And this is why I think it's inappropriate that religions keep trying to put a face on God. We just have to recognize His omnipotence, we live in it, and His omnipresence. And I wish that religions would do that. Every day remind that we are all in His presence. We are all in His presence at every moment. So I'd like to take the time to thank you for finding your way to this. I want you to think about it and remind you that we all can build personal relationships with our Creator. Just take a walk, talk with Him, have Him know your voice. Look into the commandments, try to live as He has guided us. I mean, I've got the three things that came to me. Our science, and this got me on this journey, our science reveals God's methods. The key to meeting God's expectation of us is self-control, and diversity is His. As servants, we must honor His diversity. None of this is unique or contradicts anything that we know came from the Creator. But it just was for me to update, so to recognize and bring that merging of basically faith and science, to recognize that all our science came from the Creator. Everything that our scientists and our greatest minds do, they discover. They discover. They do not create these rules. We are constantly discovering the omnipotence of our Creator. And so it's unfortunate that we associate that they try to associate it with something they call nature, which really is, they've taken their attributes and says, okay, nature is like me. So they've created nature in their likeness. Nature did this, and nature, because that's what I would have done. See, when in fact, by inspiration, it's the esis, that life logic module that's in all living things, that connects us, all of us, with everything else in nature. That's the connection. So once again, I want to thank you, and until next time, I'd like you to, to think about this, do your own investigation, and I'll continue bringing the word forward. Once again, thank you very much, and until next time, may God bless us all.